Welcome to the PGN Podcast. With this podcast, we're looking to normalise the conversation around flooding. What happens behind the scenes, lifting the curtains on the mystery that can sometimes come into play when you're either involved with flooding or trying to protect your home. We're talking to some experts in the industry and relaying some of the experiences we heard from some communities. Hopefully, after our series, you'll have a bit more information to help yourself or help others in an emergency where flooding is involved.
Hello and welcome to this episode of the PGN Podcast with myself, Carl, and Meshi.
Hi.
In the past episodes, we've talked a lot about flood management, flooding and groundwater, and how we are looking at the incidents and recovery and building back better, in essence. But now we're going to have a look at the future. We've got a very interesting guest today, and Meshi.
Hi, Jess. Welcome to our podcast. Please introduce yourself. Tell us more about you.
Yeah, so my name's Jess Cook. I'm Net Zero Programme Manager at North of Tyne Combined Authority, and North of Tyne are the accountable body for the partnership Net Zero North East England. So I specifically lead that partnership, which is all about accelerating our region's transition to net zero.
Good opener there, because you can just start telling us more about Net Zero North East England.
Absolutely.
What is it?
Yeah, so we're a partnership across public, private, voluntary, academic sectors. So you name it, everybody's involved. With the idea, as I say, to accelerate our transition. But in doing so, we want to create a cleaner, greener and fairer North East. So that cleaner is focused on clean growth opportunities, more and better jobs, increased innovation. Greener looks at environmental protection, restoration and improvement. And fairer is that bit that's focused on a just transition. So how can we ensure that everyone can participate, that nobody suffers detriment as a result of our actions, and that if we do identify detriment, we find a suitable way to mitigate against that. We're not really a delivery arm, we're conveners, so it's about bringing people together, about sharing that best practice, learning, finding a way to build an evidence hub and a dashboard of progress indicators to show how we're doing as a region. But most importantly for me, it's about that celebration piece. So how do we showcase what amazing work is already happening? How do we amplify that? And how do we really make the North East the place to do net zero?
Is part of that being an influencer?
I'd say so. I mean, I'm certainly not an influencer from a social media perspective, but yeah, you know, it's about trying to influence both within the region and outside of the region as well, because, you know, a lot of these things, when we're engaging, we're finding, say, some challenges or barriers that people face, then it's about, well, is it appropriate for us to deal with that inside the region, or is it something that's better with us trying to influence, say, national government into how they make changes as well, or even influencing in other sectors? So is it actually that we start considering how different sectors can work together, and something they might not have thought of before?
Yeah, so obviously my role within the Northumbrian Great Drainage Partnership, that's predominantly flooding and drainage related. Yep. A partnership between local authorities, Northumbrian Water and the Environment Agency. So flooding is a key part of or it's a consequence of climate change in essence. And talking about net zero and talking about different sectors, what other sectors outside of flooding and water management are part of the Net Zero North East England vision and ambition?
You name it, I suppose, is the answer. You name it, it'll be in there. So our key priority areas that we focus on are trying to touch upon all of those sectors. So we have transport, one of our biggest emitters in the region. So about 30% of our emissions are related to transport. We then move to large emitters, so industries and sectors, manufacturing. That's probably, I think, about 12%. Energy and heat plays a significant role in when we're looking at what our future is from a whole energy system perspective and considering renewable sources and low carbon alternatives. Housing and buildings is another one that's really high. It's about 30% again of our region's emissions. And we've really got to think about that, because that's going to be a really hard nut to crack, because actually it's hitting the domestic market as well. Mm-hmm. Agriculture, land use, food, they're all really important for us to consider, and often an area that I think people forget about when we start talking about net zero. And then we also have wastewater and pollution. So it's literally, I think nearly every sector can fit within there somehow.
Yeah. So you mentioned energy there.
Yes.
And obviously low carbon and district heating are important parts of making that net zero switch. Obviously, Project Groundwater Northumbria is a groundwater project, but a key challenge of this is understanding the mine workings and the mining infrastructure. In the past, that's led to flooding incidents, but there are opportunities in relation to net zero, particularly with district energy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a resource as well,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's one, that we're really uniquely placed for within our region. I mean, if you think about what the Northeast offers us, we've got urban and rural mixed right across our region. And I'm talking about the local authorities, 7 local authorities. So from Northumberland right down to Sunderland and Durham. We've got a great coastline, port infrastructure. So that sets up a lot of things for offshore wind and looking at the opportunities that gives us. Our history, though, we have mines as part of our history. That was here. That was our collective culture, industry, mining, engineering. And while people might look at that and think that might not be, the best thing that's in our history, or maybe it didn't end very well, what opportunities that's given us are quite substantial. And mine water is exactly one of those. So we have our mine water blocks. This gives us an opportunity to use that as a way of heating our homes and thinking a little bit differently. And you're right to notice that Gateshead Council already have a heat network that's built on using that mine water. It's been running for about 6 months. It's the biggest in Great Britain, one of the biggest in Europe. And it's a great opportunity for us to learn how we can do that across the region. And there's loads of opportunities to do so. And even to go one step further than mine water, to start looking at deep geothermal as well, because those opportunities are there too. So there's loads of stuff going for the Northeast, and it's just how we sort of bring that all together, catalyse it, and really put the investment in that we need to get it moving.
NIDP, they're just a really successful partnership that's been going on for about 10 years. And with this new partnership as well, there's always a conversation around the challenges against getting different organizations with different business objectives to come together for a joint ambition. Could you talk us through a little bit what the current structure looks like for Net Zero Northeast?
Of course, yeah. So we have an executive partnership board that sits at the top of our structure. So that was really important that was co-chaired across business leadership and political leadership, because we need that buy-in. Local authorities, there's some evidence that shows that they have responsibility or can tackle around 80% of carbon emissions within their local authority area. They have direct responsibility for about a third of those. So they really have a big part to play, but so do all of our businesses, and so do other communities of interest. So our board is co-chaired by Heidi Mottram of Northumbrian Water. And then from a political side, our other 2 co-chairs are Mayor Jamie Driscoll for the north of Tyne region, and Councillor Graham Miller for the south of Tyne, who's leader at Sunderland City Council. And then our board is also structured with additional political representation from the leader at Northumberland County Council, which gives us some party political balance. He also will be leading our rural and environment portfolio for devolution. And then we have business leadership from Mott MacDonald and Ryder Architecture and the Federation of Small Businesses. And then on top of that, we also have our communities of interest. So we have the universities, Transport Northeast, the Trade Union Congress, the Environment Agency, the voluntary sector represented by Voluntary Organisations Network Northeast, and the other climate group that's in there being NECO, so the Northeast England Climate Coalition. And they really oversee our whole structure and everything that we're doing. We have separate groups that sit underneath that. And I mentioned earlier about us being a convener and not being the delivery partners. Those groups that sit in our delivery section are really, really important to the work, because we couldn't do this all on our own. It's about understanding all of the activity that's happening and finding a way to report back on it. So in that section, we have a net zero innovation catalyst. So bringing together private sector businesses with academia to try and find ways to prompt these new solutions coming forward for some of the biggest challenges we face. We have our local authority group, because as I say, they have some significant influence in this area, and their actions will be a massive part of the puzzle. We have a joint policy and evidence group with the group Insights Northeast, who are there to try and close the gap between academia and policymakers. And they're actually working on something quite exciting called our Pathways to Net Zero, which will, the best way of describing it is sort of like a shopping list approach for us to say, well, if we did X, Y, and Z, this is how much it would cost us, but this is what we could get out of it. And this is where we would be from a carbon position. And then we have our thematic groups on top of all of that. So we have things around housing retrofit and climate from a built environment perspective. Waste management and land use are covered there. And then we have all the groups on top of them that aren't technically Net Zero Northeast groups, but that we are engaging with regularly. So from the Environmental Leaders Network, the NIDP being another, CBI, there are so many groups in our region. Newcastle Gateshead Initiative, they do some stuff around net zero as well. So we're trying to keep on top of everything there. The idea is we weren't there to replace anything. We weren't there to duplicate work that was already happening. It was trying to harness that work that was happening and tie it together.
Link it all up.
Yeah.
And I think, from my own perspective here, obviously talked about NIDP, which is predominantly there to facilitate capital flood risk projects. One of the problems I think that we are facing in the longer term future is we need to be more climate aware of our solutions. We need to think about those wider benefits, the multifunctional approach to flooding infrastructure. Those cannot necessarily be quantified in the same way that we could quantify, the volume of water on great infrastructure, etc. But what I feel is that those solutions that we're proposing, while they're not necessarily cost viable or potentially fully funded, there's got to be a way to facilitate investment within the region. And I think, thinking about businesses and are a lot more climate aware, are a lot more climate conscious and environmentally conscious. How can we work together to get local businesses, national businesses, organisations more involved in implementing solutions, not just on their own, because not all of them have land to deliver their carbon goals or sustainability strategies. How do we as local authorities work with them to try and deliver a carbon resilience or climate adaptation in a way that works for us as a region?
I think one of the first things you said when you were asking me that was about sort of like those multi-benefits or co-benefits, as I tend to touch upon them. And I think that's one of the really important things that we bring out, because a lot of people think about net zero activity and they think about it in silo. It's going to cost me this amount of money. I don't have that amount of money, therefore I'm not going to do it. Yeah. Or if I do it, I've got to stop doing something else. If we look at this from identifying those core benefits and saying that, by installing this flood defence, but doing so in a nature-based solution, with a nature-based solution, we can achieve X, Y, and Z. We can open up more access to green space. We can improve health options. We can increase biodiversity. There's loads of things. Then the investment starts to become a bit more viable. And the other thing that's really important there is once you start doing that, it opens up those opportunities for collaboration and understanding where other sectors, other organisations are looking to do very similar things.
Yeah.
And then that's a way of sharing resource and capacity. One of the things the partnership's really keen on doing is trying to find those opportunities for collaboration and consortium bids for funding that might be available. And we're trying to facilitate the building of those consortiums, especially across relationships that maybe wouldn't have happened before. So sectors that might never have talked to each other. So that's one way that you can do it. The other thing, though, is we're quite keen on exploring the different funding opportunities that might exist within our region. So to achieve net zero, it's very, very difficult for any organisation to achieve absolute zero. They focus on reducing their emissions first, and then whatever's left over, they have to think about removing. So the removal tends to come in the form of offsets. And it's very easy for somebody to log online and find a way of offsetting by buying, a tree, planting a few thousand trees in a country that is miles away and the other side of the world and doesn't really mean anything to us. Technically, they've done what they're supposed to do, but wouldn't it be better if they could invest that in region?
Absolutely.
So if they can identify what their residual carbon emissions are, and we can put a monetary value on that, they could invest that money into a project or several projects within our region, which then has a regional benefit. It's on their doorstep. It's something they can see. Their families themselves can benefit from. Yeah. But actually, we're delivering something else that maybe wouldn't have been funded otherwise.
Yeah. And I think as well, the assets we have from a flood management perspective, it can be in urban areas, rural areas, residential areas. And we really need to celebrate the purpose of them, give them some advocacy, because if people understand why they're there, they appreciate them more. But as well, we need to celebrate these and inform people why they're there. And totally. if that was the case, there could in essence be, if they were co-funded by businesses, for example, bit of blue sky thing in here, we could in essence, that business could sponsor a SUDS feature. And that could potentially work. It promotes their business, but also it raises awareness of why that's there and can fund maintenance.
And it gives a legacy as well. I think that's another thing, they have a regional footprint, they have a legacy that can be seen by the people that work for that organisation in their own region. I do think it's a really important thing to look at. And there's a few different ways that we could potentially achieve it. It's not going to be easy because, there has to be a lot of system and a lot of principles and guidance created around that to make sure that we're doing it in the right way, that we're verifying carbon correctly. There's an accounting element that you have to consider. But I'm keen on exploring it further because I really do think that there's some great opportunities for investment. There's opportunities, don't get me wrong, for investors from around the world that, we need to draw them here and we need to say, come invest here. And we still will find opportunities to do that. But the idea that we might be able to build up these funding pots based on regional activity, I think is something quite exciting. So watch this space, who knows?
Yeah, I mean, we've got a lot to live up to with people like Joseph Swan and the Stevensons coming from the region, haven't we? But
do you know that it's back to being part of our heritage and our legacy and exactly that, it inspires us. I think, it's about not forgetting where we've come from, but building from that. And that's what's really important.
Is there part of this that has to do with accountability? Creative accounting finds its way into the equation, trying to understand if that's part of the context of making this a more sustainable
it has plan. To be. It has to be. There's accountability. There's also credibility, and being able to to knowingly say that you've achieved something, that you've done something that is good, is something that needs to be really part of this. We talk about planting trees. That's the go-to offset that everybody thinks of. Oh, I need to offset my emissions, I'm going to go plant some trees. I actually don't know that if we've got the actual land to be able to plant the number of trees that organisations have committed to. I don't even know if we've got the land available.
Well, we need a lot of land to build houses on
exactly.
as well, of course.
So, getting that balance right. But the other thing with planting trees, and I have nothing against trees. Trees are amazing. They're a great natural carbon sequesters. They're really important. We need them, especially in our urban spaces. We need more. But the issue with planting a tree is the longevity of that. So how long can you actually rely on a tree being there for?
Yeah.
Is it going to be there for 5 years and someone knocks it down, but you've built into your carbon accounting that it's there for 30?
Yeah.
And then you just go, well, wait a second, somebody's felled that tree. It's not there anymore. So what do I do with that carbon that I've offset against that tree? So there is an accountability point there because you do have to think about that longer term. Yeah. You have to make choices that actually, you can justify, you can back up.
And as well, we talk about those multifunctional benefits. Planting a tree, anywhere, you're getting that carbon sequestration. But if you plant it in a city, that can absorb water. Water doesn't go through the treatment process. It can cool in the summer, and it can give us cleaner, greener air.
Absolutely. I mean, tree canopies in a city centre, if you have a proper tree canopy, has the possibility of reducing ground temperature by 20 degrees. Now, ground temperature is very different to air temperature. And in our hotter summers that we're getting, our hotter and drier summers, the ground can go to a ridiculous temperature. That's why they say don't let your dogs walk on hot pavements, because it can actually burn. So if we can reduce ground temperature by 20 degrees, that's massive. But you're absolutely right. It's got the opportunity to stop, or reduce flooding to an extent because it soaks up that water and holds it for much longer, as well as the carbon. We just need to make sure people plant them in the ground and not in pots. Because you see them in these big pots, you go, that's not going to do the job.
I guess the other thing is just the process by which you identify the appropriate measures. So I think in health and safety, we talk about ERIC, which is eliminate, reduce, isolate, and control.
Yep.
And you describe the process by which you try to reduce your carbon or offset it when you can and when you can't. And really, it's how embedded that process is, because it can be tempting for a company just go, just offset it over there, as opposed to challenge what they're doing. So
Yeah.
what are the checks and balances in that process at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the sort of the jargon busters thing where people talk about being carbon neutral. And carbon neutrality can be done by just offsetting. You could just purchase a boatload. You could purchase an entire forest if you were able to offset your organization's emissions, and technically you would be carbon neutral. That's not the right way, I would say, of going about it. Is definitely about net zero. We really do need to reduce. We can't just pass the buck to somewhere else. So that reduction is really important. It does require an understanding of carbon accounting. So understanding what's in your direct control and what isn't. That's the difference between the Greenhouse Gas Protocol emissions scopes. So we talk about scope 1, 2 and 3. Scope 1 is the things that are in your direct control. Scope 2 and 3 are indirect, but 2 is really just the energy that you purchase. That's for heating, cooling, ventilation. But then scope 3 is everything else. So it's everything that sits within your value chain. So whether it's your purchase goods and services through to staff commuting, business travel, the life cycle of your products. There's loads of stuff to think about there. And there's loads of support out there to help people understand it. There's also loads of accounting software, so carbon calculators and things that can help them get there. So it's about really taking a step back and having a proper assessment and a look at your business operations and saying, okay, these are the areas we can control. These are the areas that we don't have direct control in, but we know we have to do something on, because otherwise we're not going to be able to reduce our emissions enough. And that's really where those organizations then have a role in influencing, because they have to influence their suppliers and their supply chain to be able to reduce their emissions.
Is there scope then to mandate transparency when we come to reporting on our emissions, whether it's net zero or otherwise, like being clear on how you've achieved it? And I will reference something that's potentially a different space, but applies here when we talk about the pay gap, the gender pay gap. And the first time that happened, companies just said, oh yeah, there is no pay gap, because, and then you interrogate the numbers and you're like, right, okay, be transparent about where people sit so we can see a realistic picture, not what the top line says, but what the content behind it is. Is there value having something similar, interrogating the process? And you look at the value of like offsetting, for example, at very little reduction, or it feels a bit like, I would say a harsh word, but mis-selling.
I can totally understand that. So there is there are some mandated requirements already on certain size organisations to report on their carbon, and hopefully that's something that starts to expand so that more do so. But even those that aren't mandated to do so are voluntarily doing so. So we can see there's a change. There's a real change there. One thing that they have to do though in carbon reporting is to, particularly when it comes to those scope 3 emissions, so those ones that aren't in your direct control, is to justify your methodology and to be consistent with your methodology. When you come to purchase goods and services, there are 4 possible routes that you can do, and some of them are like a mix of others. One of them is even called the hybrid route. But that's looking at whether or not you have one that's based on spend. So there are some figures out there that sort of say for this product, you account for this amount of carbon for every pound you spend. It's one way of doing it. It's not particularly accurate, but sometimes it's the best that people have. So it's better than nothing. And then right up to where organizations actually provide you with their life cycle assessment data and their carbon data for their products and services. So in that situation, that one's the far better method, but it's not always available. So we need to have in the reporting that sort of justification, the consistency and the transparency. When it comes to offsetting, this is one of the major issues where people are worried, because that mis-selling bit that you mentioned, it's like, are you actually buying from a verified source? Can you believe and agree with the methodologies that they've provided, calculated?
If they're not selling 3 trees and
exactly,
only planting 1,
or they're putting any in, so I wouldn't say just go online and find the first one that you type into Google, because that's not necessarily going to be the right way to do it. So it is about being able to trust the organisation that you're working with there.
Yeah, and I think I've got probably another hour's worth of questions here, but I won't. But I think what I'm curious about here as well is obviously dealing with businesses and organisations. Is there a particular difference in approach from, say, big businesses, national, multinational, international businesses, to your sort of smaller, medium enterprise and local traders?
There has to be, really.
Yeah.
And, bigger businesses have bigger teams that are able to dedicate more time to this. They have bigger budgets that they're able to dedicate more money and resource to this. So that's always going to be the case. But actually, bigger businesses are often further ahead, again, because they're the businesses that are mandated to report on this, so they have to do something. But they are further ahead in the game because they've been able to put that additional time and resource in that smaller businesses haven't. Now, we had our summit earlier this week, Net Zero Northeast's annual summit on Monday, and we joined about 250 different organisations from around the region, which was amazing to have that many in the room. And they massively ranged from big businesses to small to academia and everybody in between. And, I facilitated a panel session where we heard from a small regional business who actually was able to tell us about how they've built their business on sustainability. They started with sustainability. They knew that was the thing that they had to get right, and they've made sure that they've done that. And they've made some difficult decisions. They were talking about packaging and the difference between the packaging that you can buy of a competitor that only costs 3p for them to purchase that packaging compared to their compostable packaging that costs them 45p each time. So that's going to be a difference. That's going to be the thing that'll stop some smaller businesses from going ahead.
And I think from a flood risk perspective as well, if you have two units identical to each other on a street, they're both flood. One's owned or managed by a multinational company and the other's just a sole trader.
Yeah.
That incident could potentially put one of them out of business.
It absolutely can.
And I think, it's really important that kind of we use this, the bigger businesses to help our high streets recover.
Yes.
From incidents like this. And it's about obviously collective responsibilities, even if those smaller businesses can't afford to contribute in a similar way and their carbon footprint is probably significantly less. The impact on that business is significantly higher.
It is.
I'm going to go sidebar on you yet, but the apprenticeship levy.
Yes.
The whole point of the apprenticeship levy is to provide higher education, supported higher education from a centrally funded pot, right? Fairly. Mm-hmm. So whether you're an apprentice in a big firm or a small shop, in theory, you have access to the levy to get the learning that you need. And companies and employers pay proportionally into it. And the money's there and it's safeguarded and it's there for anybody to have access to. And the reason I refer to that is on your comment, Carl, that certain people can afford to do more and others can't because they just don't have the funds to do it. And whether there is a conversation around creating a system similar to how the levy operates, which creates, it's never going to be the same, but a fairer balance where you have that access to be more resilient without putting your entire business at risk.
Yeah, I mean, our entire society is built on levies and cross subsidies. That's exactly what it is. And I think that's where a lot of funding from central government is likely to come from. There's been a lot of talk about the green levies that are applied to domestic and business energy bills. And that's something that shouldn't just be applied as just a set rate that everyone pays the same. It's very much that they should pay proportionately for the energy that they use. And there are a number of charities that are trying to push for that to make sure that it is more fair and equitably distributed. So absolutely, yes, there is that. And I think, if an organisation like a big business has a responsibility to part fund improvements to an area or are in a position where they can do that and other organisations are expected to contribute, I would like to think that could be done in that equitable manner, that you could just contribute a proportion that's directly related. So it's like when you move in with somebody. Is it fair to say that you pay 50% of the rent each if one of you earns 3 times the amount the other earns?
Exactly that.
It's about just making sure that you get that balance right, that it's about the proportion of your salary rather than it being the actual amount for joint benefit.
Yeah. And you mentioned there obviously about the charitable sector. How important is engagement with the charitable sector in achieving net zero?
Oh, do you know, it's absolutely huge. And some of the charitable sector organisations are amazing. I say charitable sector, I mean the VCSE sector. So we're talking voluntary, community and social enterprise. I mentioned earlier that we have voluntary organisation networks Northeast on our board. They manage through VON a programme called Going Green Together. And that's a great programme because it's bringing those charitable groups together, giving them the support they need over a course of, I think it's 12 months, to really make a difference in this area. And some of them are doing fabulous things, really great things, and doing so in a way that touches upon that core benefits point as well. So there's examples of community gardens being built, which are providing food to local residents, but also encouraging them to come and volunteer and giving them some social activity as well. And they're having great effects because they're looking at biodiversity net gain options and things like that. How can they reduce waste, circular economy initiatives? They're all being encouraged to do so. And there's some great examples of like accreditations that they can go for and they can work towards, investment in environment being one of them. And it just means that, that they're there, that they've got this focus, and it shows that you don't have to be massive in order to do it. But the other thing I think as well is, they need income to keep themselves going. They may be charities, but you can run them as a business, and the fact it just doesn't make profit. They're a not-for-profit business. And I think what happens is a lot of large organisations look to those smaller charitable and community organisations and think, oh, well, we can bung them a bit of money and they'll do this work for us. But we need to start thinking about the value that they can add and the diversity of the opinions that they bring and the work that they do, and really show that we value them. But they are vital.
Yeah. And again, from a flood management perspective, a lot of what we talk about here is, conceptually in your head, it's urban. But, I think of the work that the Tyne Rivers Trust do, the Tyne Estuary Partnership and the Woodland Trust, and potential natural flood management schemes that have came about, which we've talked about in previous podcasts. And I think that's the charity, charities are a massive part of how we move forward. And again, charities themselves, they can apply for funds or grants or bursaries that aren't necessarily available to us as a local authority as well.
Yeah. And, there are, as you mentioned, there's a few other ones that are absolutely fantastic, doing some stuff around our estuaries and our marine partnerships and things like that. And, I think there's opportunities with them as well to help fund the work that they're doing, but also to provide some resource to them as well. They do need people. They don't want to be bringing people in to volunteer for a half a day that they've got to train up for that half a day, but people that can actually spend a bit of time with them and do some of the stuff that gets them back out and doing the work that's really important. So we've got to definitely play around with that a bit and see what else we can do.
What are your top 3 priorities on becoming a more climate change resilient community?
So there's an awful lot that can go in there. It's going to be very hard to pick 3. But I definitely
more than 3.
No, I definitely think I've mentioned it a lot. I think the co-benefit approach is really, really important, and I'll ram that home. It's not about us thinking about things in silo. It's about what can this give us in other areas of our lives? What health improvements can we get from increasing active travel options? What biodiversity improvements do we get by looking at flood solutions that are nature-based, and can that give other people access to green spaces and things like that? And I think, by us looking at that and that payback, understanding how much for every pound we spend, how much does that give us in those additional benefits is a really important thing to look at. I think that collaboration is also incredibly important. We have to be prepared to share our learning. There's no point in an organisation going out and doing something, it not working and them keeping it to themselves. Actually sharing when something's gone wrong to avoid others making the same mistake is so important. And I'm, we're very keen on celebrating those successes and sharing that. And I totally understand that organisations are more willing to share a success than a failure. But actually, could we share a bit of that as well? That would be really great. But more than that, can we bring people together to add that value? So can we do that from a cross-sector basis? Can we get sectors that would never normally work together suddenly thinking, do you know what? It'd be really great if we could work together on this. Thinking about if we're going to be disrupting our environment. So, from an infrastructure perspective, this is something we've long talked about, is the idea of if the road's going to be dug up to do electricity works, why can't we do the gas and the water at the same time? Save it being pulled back up again. That's actually massively carbon intensive when you think about concrete and asphalt and all of that sort of stuff that has to be replaced. So, that just other ways of thinking about things.
And again, the NIDP, we've identified windows where both Northumbrian Water and a local authority are working in the same area, and it might even be for like mains replacement when a sewer improvement's going on or highway drainage is getting improved and or traffic calming schemes going in, and it works because we're trying
coordinating.
Coordinate.
Yeah, it's much better for the local community as well, because it's a big upheaval a lot of the time and things.
I think also, you hear it all the time, they're digging up that road again. They don't know what they're doing, do they? And no one really cares if it's a different company digging up. They just see someone digging up the same road.
They don't know that it's a different company.
Yeah.
And it's just about being a bit more intelligent in your planning and coordinating.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I know with highways, for example, you have highway embargoes, and when you open a road, you can't open it for 12 months. There are constraints that come with.
And then as a region, we've got things like Great North Road, and obviously places like the Metro Centre for Christmas shopping, where they can't be replacing a load of roads around the Metro Centre 2 weeks before Christmas.
It's just bearing that in mind. Obviously, if there was a massive sinkhole appeared, then there's no avoiding that.
Or
emergency works are different.
Or a groundwater flooding incident on Easter weekend, which actually happened.
Did it really? Okay,
Well, back in 2016.
That would make a big difference.
Right behind the Metro Centre.
Definitely, definitely.
Yeah. So I think, we've talked a lot about businesses and net zero North East England, but I'm going to push us in a slightly different direction here.
Okay.
And that's about climate change for us as individuals, as people. Personally, I sometimes see this as a privilege, but I want to give this a bit of context. So last year I was at a youth climate change summit, and there was 16 to 18 year olds from all social demographics, and I was on a table with a few teenagers, and I said, what's your carbon footprint on, say, travel? And one was like, my dad's got an electric car through work, so we've got an electric car. And on the other side of it, and there were genuinely both sides of it, they said, we haven't got a car, we can't afford one, we use a bus.
Yep.
And I think, are we at a point, is it a privilege to be more climate aware and more, proactive towards achieving net zero?
I'm going to say it's a yes and a no. There are, because actually, one of the key things for us is, in the case of the electric car versus the bus, actually the person who uses the bus might have the lower carbon footprint. And so actually by not having that choice, they're actually possibly performing better in regards to their carbon footprint. That's not a world, though, that I want to be in. I want to be in a world where people have that choice.
Yeah.
Now, I can't magic up income that will allow those people to, if they want to, buy a car. We can't do that. But what we can do is we can start thinking about those solutions that are out there and what else might be needed. Yeah. So one that I often come to for this is around how you heat your home. And the idea of a heat pump, and heat pumps being one of those things that, I don't want to say are silver bullet because they're not, but they're sort of marketed in that way that people think that I have to have a heat pump. And they're expensive to install. It's disruptive to your home, requires you pulling out everything. For some properties, they're exactly what you need because they will provide a much cheaper and more comfortable heat in your home. For others, they're probably not really suitable. We have a mix of like Tyneside terraced properties, for example, that actually they're not probably the best solution for those households.
Yeah.
So do we have enough solutions now, or is there actually something else that we can do? Should we go out and find more? Things like mine water heat networks are one of those examples where we've gone, do you know what, there's something else we can do here, and we found another solution. Geothermal, we're testing, or will be within the coming months, new projects that can use that for heating homes. There are other options as well. So it's finding all of those options, and we're not there. We'll get some of the way with the solutions we have, but we need more. It's innovation. And I think by doing that, we start to open it up where individuals can make a choice that's not being forced upon them. It's not something that they choose or are forced to choose, go in a certain direction based on income or time, but it's actually something that they could choose that's right for them. Yeah. And that, if we could get to that, I mean, it might be blue sky thinking, but if we could get to that, that would be amazing.
And I think, getting back to transport, I know it's not specifically flood risk here, but, you think of London and more recently Manchester, where they've built, a good quality public transport network. Yep. The car usage is reduced. But are we, as a region, as a nation, as society, are we based on consumer culture here? Is it a social kind of status to have two cars? Is it a social status, to be buying more clothes, etc.? Is it in essence consumerism giving us a massive carbon footprint?
Curb appeal.
Yeah.
Some of it, yeah. Some people, absolutely, that status sort of side of things, they want to be seen wearing certain things or doing certain things, acting a certain way. Yeah, absolutely. For most people, particularly in the Northeast, I wouldn't say that that's the major thing. Yeah. We have 25% of our economies or our adults are deemed to be economically inactive. 2/5 of our population of children are in poverty. That's massive. That's horrendous. We shouldn't be in that. So those people can't make that decision based on status. But I think, it's an interesting one because there's a lot there, and you've given a lot of examples around fast fashion being one of them. That has a massive water impact, huge. And if I'm not mistaken, 9% of textiles make up 9% of the microplastics in our oceans. So there's something related to water that we really need to control. So that's absolutely something that we need to look at. The car thing, the public transport options, they are things that people choose based on convenience, or they choose based on price, whatever it might be. When it comes to transport, and you mentioned London and Manchester, we're actually in the process now of devolution. We have a Minder 2 devolution deal going through government. That should mean that from May 24, we're in that position where we have one combined authority in this region. And it's really exciting because our devolution deal offers us so much opportunity. And one of those opportunity areas is in transport. So we'll have now increased transport powers that could mean that we can improve our transport options so that actually we can encourage people to leave the car at home and to use active and public transport options, because they'll go further, or they'll make it easier, or we'll have integrated ticketing options that get them there far easier. And we're not focusing on boundaries in order to do it. So there's definite change coming. And that's not the only thing with devolution. There's loads there around innovation and housing retrofit and skills. Skills is massive. There's loads we can do with skills.
I guess the main thing is the ability to control, to set our own agenda to suit our needs as a region. And that includes probably addressing some of our biggest challenges, which on a national scale can sometimes be further down the pecking order.
Yeah. And I think, we as a region have therefore that more control with the new devolved authority, because we know what our region needs. We know what our challenges are. And net zero is one of what we're calling our cross-cutting themes for devolution. So it doesn't sit on its own, because back to my whole point, I don't want it to be dealt with in silo. Exactly. That's been recognised by our politicians and our councils. So net zero sits as a cross-cutting theme across all of our portfolio areas, because it needs to be thought about in every decision that we make, whether that's on tourism and sport, whether it's on transport, whether it's on our economy in general. We have to have that thought about, well, where does net zero fit? Where does our green economy come from? So there's loads of opportunity on the horizon as a result of that. And I think it's quite an exciting time for our region, actually.
Definitely, yeah.
Some nodding heads, which is always good.
Getting back to the devolution, we at the NIDP have had a few knowledge shares with Greater Manchester Combined Authority and the Integrated Water Management Plan Partnership. And we've had a few discussions with them about how devolution has changed how they operate as a flood management sector. And I think it can really lead to some exciting opportunities. Not necessarily anything more than what the NIDP gives now, but certainly within formalising it in a governance structure. And I think that's a really exciting opportunity. Brilliant.
And learnings like that, are being taken all of the time by some of our senior officers within the Combined Authority and in others, the local authorities as well. And that's why we're doing this as I talk about Net Zero North East being about collaboration. Devolution is too. That's why it's all being done from a collaborative angle with all 7 local authorities. So it's not just somebody making a decision in the centre of Newcastle for people in Durham or rural Northumberland. It's very much about, they're here, they're representing the people that live in those areas, and what can we do for them? What's their biggest priorities?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think we're all very excited about what's going to happen next year with devolution. We do have one final question. It's essentially very important for this conversation, climate change, and we're looking to the future. We're looking to be more resilient, looking to be prepared and ready to keep our families, our communities, everybody going. And this particular question is around one disruptive, transformative idea that could get us there.
Interesting. So the first thing, I'm going to go with the first thing that came to my head. Okay. I think that's often the way to go. Go with your instinct, go with your gut. The first thing that came to my head is actually a conversation I've just had this morning. So I've spoken at 2 schools today, at Year 10 geography students, given them some insights into what green options they could consider for their future. And one of the things I said is, and it seemed to be the thing when one of the teachers asked, were you listening in the back? That was remembered, was the idea that every job can be a green job. We don't need to be thinking the typical green careers anymore. And the thing that I said to them was, bear in mind that if you choose a job that's greener, then it's more likely to be here in the long run. Mm-hmm. We're moving away from carbon intensive jobs and industries and thinking about what our low carbon alternatives are. Don't go for the industry that's not going to be here in 10 or 15 years. Go for the one that's here for the long haul and can set your future straight. And they remembered that. That was the bit that the boy in the back who definitely wasn't listening got right at the last minute. Amazing that Year 10s can multitask in that way. But that's probably the thing for me. If you're going to be disruptive, let's start thinking differently about how we work and what we do and what our own individual responsibility is, because any job can be a green job. Yeah. We just have to think differently about how we do it.
Yeah. And I think, kind of you've talked about, the future, getting people into our sector, and in flood management, we're having a struggle attracting people into our sector. Yeah. People are climate aware, but don't necessarily know civil engineering, and it is a climate, a climate specific role.
It's a huge role.
It's a huge role, and I think to do any climate change related qualification, it's got to be at a degree level or above. And again, what I was saying about the social privilege of being climate aware, I feel that's the same in education. Now, I'm going to put I want your opinion on this. So within transport, the Department for Transport have started doing an apprenticeship for transport planning.
Okay.
Could we see an apprenticeship for climate studies. We've talked about net zero, we've talked about a vast range of sectors that we need to work together to achieve net zero. Is it the future that can learn about all of these things and glue it together?
Absolutely. I mean, in preparation for that talk I've referenced this morning, I looked at the Green Careers Hub and looked at the regional data for what they say. And actually, between 2021 and 2024, they had estimated there'll be 13,000 green apprentices starting in our region. 13,000, that's amazing. And if we can keep that growing and grow it a bit more, then great. There's opportunities there around adult education and upskilling of jobs. I think there's an estimate that it's 107,000 jobs need upskilling into something that's green. That's not a whole going off and studying and change career. This is, what do you do with the skills you already have to make them that little bit greener? Yeah. So yeah, I think it's very much about, looking at the jobs and what we have within our region across the whole picture, not just the people that are degree educated and potentially working in those more senior positions. And that's not always the case, but it might be. But anybody that's going into any position, what else do they need? What level of carbon literacy do they need just to think, I can apply this to something else? Green skills boot camps being another opportunity as well.
But I think also it's kind of going back to what you said, Jess, about any job can be a green job. It's looking at the study programs that we have right now and adapting them.
Yeah. I was speaking to somebody who works at a number of colleges, one of them being Newcastle College, and it's about making courses more sustainable. And one of those that you wouldn't necessarily jump to straight away is hairdressing. And actually, what can they do to be more sustainable? And they're doing great things about how they use products and how they wash towels and things like that. In hairdressing. So any job we can apply it to anything. And I think it's really important that we get that sustainability messaging in every course that anybody takes, at whatever level that might be. It might not be that your entire college course is focused on sustainability, but that you see it featured in each of your modules to sort of say, think a bit differently about this.
And I think, looking at one of my recent apprentices through college and what he was doing compared to what I did more than 20 years ago, the topics haven't changed and modules haven't changed, but the way we work and the way we want to, be more climate aware has.
Yeah, absolutely. And now I think, if you compare that to 20 years ago, our knowledge on climate change is far better. Our attitudes towards it are definitely improving and definitely going the right way. There are far more organisations that are actively trying to get involved in this space, whether it be from a reputational risk perspective or because they really, really just want to do this. I don't think it matters so much, so long as the work is right and that they're doing it and it's giving us the right results. Everyone can come along eventually. So things are definitely changing. We just need to adapt a little with the way that we've always done things to make sure we all get there.
Well, on that note, thank you so much for your time today, Jess.
No problem.
It has been amazing sitting out with you.
Thanks for having me.
Very informative. Lots to take away. I think our project Groundwater Northumbria, we have a wide range of outputs, and climate change is embedded in everything, and I think it's something we also have to look into as part of our innovation. So it's been amazing having you here. Thank you so much.
I really appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to the PGN podcast today. We hope you found it informative and enjoyable. If you did, please like and subscribe to the podcast, but also please, if you find this useful to anyone else, pass it on and spread the word.
To find out more about Project Groundwater Northumbria, please visit www.pgn.org.uk.